Morning, everyone. I'm Jason Holmes, so I am here to talk a bit about customer success in the C-suite. So let me just give you a little context sort of before I start on what this means. So when I talk about customer success, my general thinking on this presentation is how do you represent the customer in the C-suite? Customer success to me is more broad than I manage the CSMs, which is in a lot of cases what people think of these days when they think of customer success. I think of the experience, whether it's the initial sale, continuing install-based selling, the professional services engagement, the customer success, ongoing account management, support, case management, and so forth. So a very broad perspective of customer success. And when I'm talking about the C-suite, I'm talking about internally within your company. So how do you manage to engage properly with the C-suite, or if you are part of the C-suite inside the organization, how do you build relationships? How do you drive visibility? How do you ultimately get results on behalf of your customers, the company's customers, but also on behalf of yourself as you'd like to sort of grow your career inside the team? My hope is that despite this is a little bit of a lofty topic, talking about how to operate internally in the executive suite inside the organization, that you'll also find it quite practical. So on that note, what was the show of hands of first time to Park City? Pretty, a little more than that, come on. Are they on your keyboard? So I have 2 words of practical advice to you. Drink water, because you will fall down later if you don't, if you have too much to drink. So that's just a bit of advice that I've seen some other people have the pleasure of enduring. I'm going to keep trying to click this and keep hope that it moves forward. All right. So evolution, I thought I would just touch on evolution a little bit on 3 contexts. So one is, we in general, this is a technology-oriented audience in the SaaS industry, is a sort of a generalization, but I feel it generally captures a good portion of the audience here. So SaaS and recurring revenue is something that continues to evolve and something that we're always trying to adjust to. In some ways, what we're working on are old problems, but in many ways, they're also quite new problems. I think there's also evolution going on inside of each of your organizations. Now, I spoke with some people last night and this morning that have very small organizations. There are people here from incredibly enormous multi-billion-dollar companies as well. And so there's a whole evolution of as your organization is growing, as it's changing, how are you evolving with it? And last, you as an individual, how are you starting in a certain position inside of your company or your last company? And how are you continuing to grow your career and evolving your career over time so that you've got larger and larger impact and larger opportunity as an individual over time inside of the career that you're running. So just to give you a little bit about my evolution just at a personal level, my evolution has started really from on-premise sales and service, so my days at Hyperion and Oracle, SaaS, sales, customer success, time at Omniture, which is where I got to know Dave and about half a dozen of the other people in the audience here. Adobe, where I looked after sort of global professional services and education, and then Marketo, where I've really taken on a role of executive leader inside of Marketo. So my comments around customer success more broadly across professional services, education, customer account management, support, and a variety of other functions, and up to and including today where we've most recently been taken private by Vista Equity Partners. My role inside of Marketo, Chief Operating Officer, and I'm also currently the Chief Operating Principal inside of the business, which essentially means that I'm accountable to make sure that sales makes their number, engineering is developing great products, we're keeping our customers along the way. So it's been an interesting and rather quick evolution to that level over the course of the last several quarters. So Marketo at a glance, I don't take anything for granted. When I started, it was a company that had $30 million in revenue and about 150 people. So these days, we're right about 1,000 people, right about 275 million in revenue. All of that revenue is SaaS, save for about 10%, which is professional services. So very much a recurring revenue business. Started as SMB, around B2B companies as our target, and today is SMB and enterprise, so GE and Microsoft and Honeywell and other very large multinationals, and B2C brands as well, so that we're starting to see that growth and transformation from B2B to include B2C, and from just small companies to now 5,000 organizations that are using Marketo for marketing automation capability and engagement marketing capability. So yesterday we actually launched our account-based marketing solution. Had about 500 people in the Four Seasons in San Francisco yesterday. And today we've got a virtual event that we're running, about 15,000 people, talking about what's going on with Marketo, and account-based marketing is our next major leg of how we drive growth inside of the marketing automation space. I've also seen the evolution of, we were private when I started. About a year later, we went public, operated as a public organization for 3 years, and then last month ended up going back private in a take private by a private equity firm called Vista Equity Partners. So it's been, it's a glance, but that glance of just 4 years has been a fair amount of change and a fair amount of evolution over time. So my 2 cents, and I made this comment around evolution a little bit, but SaaS customer management in general is in transition. So I don't think that anyone would really, like, it's not been all figured out like other parts of, the other parts of the technology landscape or other parts of business in general. But today, companies struggle executing a customer experience that fosters retention and growth. Like, does anyone feel like they've got a customer experience that's got it just all totally nailed and retention is 100% and they're also tacking on 50% growth on top of their entire customer base annually? I doubt it, right? So there's lots of work that has been done. A lot remains to be done here. Second is, there is no, like, people are just sort of categorically and consistently screwing this up across the SaaS business and across recurring revenue. So there is no consensus on the best way to drive the best possible customer experience, the best way to drive the best possible retention and customer satisfaction, and then how to then overall grow that customer base. And third is this, I can assure you, is a board level set of strategic decisions and board set of problems that are happening inside of companies, each and every one of your companies today. And so it offers you as an individual an opportunity to step in kind of an unknown and to step into a bit of a transitional space and figure out how to actually make a much more profound impact than you may be making today. Number one metric in recurring revenue. So to me, it's really simple. There's actually two. So sorry, sort of a two-part answer. I mean, to me, in recurring revenue, and it was never more clear to me sitting down with a venture capitalist about 3 years ago, said the number one retention is no doubt retention is the number one metric inside of a recurring. If there is no recurring revenue, there is no recurring revenue business, right? You just cannot outrun, I know I'm talking to people who are my peer level or better at this, so you cannot outrun with net new bookings on an annual basis a terrible retention number. So, we look at, gross retention, which is, are they staying or are they leaving, right? Maximum is 100%. So, you might have a gross retention number at 85 or 90% or 95% if you're really good or your product is absolutely spectacular. But then that net retention number is just as important as the gross number. And is your net retention, including all your upsells and all your cross-sells, is that number 110% or 120% or more? So I've had the opportunity over the course of the last several years, and actually last few months, to talk and see a variety of different businesses. Like, you tell me which business is going to do better. The one with the 70% gross and just thrilled to get to 100% net retention number. I talked to a business last week that is a couple $100 million that's grown double over the, just this last year. Their gross retention number is 95%. Their net retention number is 150%. Right? So that's a real company growing at, not at Oracle scale, right? But a real company in this SaaS small company business that's growing really rapidly. And a huge piece of that growth is actually how many customers they're keeping and then how much they're continuing to monetize out of that customer base. So hold on to this, is my advice, is you're part of the, the advocate for the customer and how to get investment into your team is retention is really, really important. Inside of the business. And it's not necessarily the first thing that comes to the mind of the CEO, the head of sales, the head of product, and other people who tend to drive a good part of the agenda in the C-suite. So you have an education job to do at some point. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I've done that and some ideas on how to actually affect that education. We have a very wise CMO that just departed Marketo, his name's Sanjay, who generally jumps on stage. So I don't jump on stages, but one of the things he taught me is he spent some time at McKinsey. There's always 3 things apparently at McKinsey. So we're going to talk about 3 things as it relates to customer success, how to advocate, how to drive customer success in the C-suite inside of the organization. One is visibility, 2 is culture, and 3 are the relationships that you build with people in the C-suite and the board inside of your business. And so rather than talking about what I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to dive right in. So visibility. The first thing that I would say here is the days of the customer success functions, CSM, support, PS, whatever, being the no news is good news department, have absolutely got to be over. And you as the leader of some piece of that organization or the leader of that overall organization for your company are absolutely, your job is to make sure that people understand what's going on with the customers, the value that the customers are getting, and to then populate the value the customers are getting from your solutions, as well as the impact of great customer investments and great customer experiences are having on the success of your organization. It is your job to stand up and drive visibility. CFO's not going to do it, CEO's not going to do it, product's not going to do it, sales sure isn't going to do it, right? So your job is to stand up and be the person that drives that visibility. Well, this changed a little. Usually I joke that in my department and in my role, I don't have access to the marketing people to make my slides look, but my slide looked nice after I built this thing. So I think there's 3 things I would talk about as it relates to visibility. And again, this is just practical. So I'm sorry if it's not at the McKinsey, 3 things, that's the only McKinsey thing, so just practical. Foundational, metrics should be sort of tilted toward the bottom. Metrics and defining metrics and getting people to understand the metrics of customer success inside of your organization is absolutely sort of a foundational element of what you need to be able to provide. So if NPS, as Ryan talked about a few minutes ago, is foundational and it's meaningful for you, that's great. Then have NPS be a key metric, but make sure everyone at the company and everyone in the C-suite understands it and believes it as emphatically as you do. Gross retention, net retention, upsell rates, define your set of metrics. I'm not here to explain to you what your metrics are. There will probably be 10 other presentations to talk about all the great metrics you can use, or you can talk with Dave and client success about that. But you have to get those metrics into the nomenclature of the organization for you, for your team, for your peers, for the CFO, for the CEO, and for the board of directors. I think the second is a set of exposures that you have. So where are the forums that you can talk through the impacts of how your customers are benefiting? And so the obvious forums, so I sit in E-staff on a weekly basis. I'm talking a little bit about my old role, not new role running the company, old role as looking after customer success more broadly. I'm not the quiet person, right? Arguably the loudest voice at the table, for better or worse at times, on being a contributing, valuable member of that executive staff. I think that the idea of going to board meetings, so at Marketo, invited to every single board meeting. We ran about 6 or 7 of them quarter after quarter, and eventually the board said, we're getting the hint here that retention is actually the most important thing. It's the biggest bookings number in the business. We want the success stuff first in the board deck, and we want Jason to present first because that's the difference between success and failure of this company over the course of the next several years. So the opportunity to be able to present and get in front of boards, getting in front of new hire onboarding and making sure that as you're driving, what should people care about as they're coming into the business, getting on the radar with people on new hire onboarding. And last, and I'll talk about this a little bit about culture, is every single all hands the organization has at Marketo, I'm on stage, a customer's on stage talking about the value that they're receiving from the Marketo solution to continue to infuse that information. And ultimately, the theme of this is to how do you get investment? You have a CEO and a board that's figuring out where are they going to place bets for growth and for long-term success. And left quiet, left is the no news is good news department. All of that investment will go to products and sales all day long is where that investment lands. And so it is your job to advocate for the customers, advocate for customer experience and customer advocacy to ultimately get the level of investment in the organization you tend to look after for the common good, which is to drive long-term persistent success for the customer base. The second thing, so that's a little on visibility. The second thing I want to talk about is culture. So culture is incredibly important. I interviewed a guy a while ago to come into Marketo, wanted to leave, and I'll leave the name of the company out of it. I'm like, why do you want to leave? Like, that company's doing well. They're public. They're growing. The stock value is great. You seem to be reporting to the CEO. Why would you come here? And he said, well, it's simple. At the end of the day, the CEO does not really have much passion or care much about customers and whether the customers are happy or sad or successful or not successful. So even Ryan, I think earlier on, made a comment around, top down. If the CEO or if the C-suite is not passionate about customer success, you're in a tough. I mean, you almost as somebody to drive that culture inside the organization can't recover if the CEO just doesn't care about it. So I would choose your CEO wisely if you're going to report to one, and ensure you choose wisely. And then you can then look at, can I turn the needle? Can I actually make this happen? And improve the situation. But fundamentally, one of the things about the founder CEO of Marketo that I absolutely appreciate is, in my role, was far, far easier with a CEO who was, if a customer is down or a customer is not happy and it's a material problem, we will stop engineering new products and stop innovating, and we will direct all of the engineering resources to solve that problem. And so I think that notion of driving, good starting point with the CEO, encouraging the CEO to continue to message along those lines, encouraging the CEO that it is their responsibility to make it a customer-centric organization. As Ryan said, not a sales one or a product one, incredibly inward-facing. We are a customer-centric organization. So you've got to be a coach to the CEO. Second are, I generally give this, speech to all new hires coming into the business. We care about customer-centric organization. If you are not somebody who cares about customers, or you are somebody who doesn't put the customer's needs first, you have taken the wrong job at the wrong company, because that is not how, you have to be very binary about it. And again, quarterly in front of the entire employee base, I generally go on this rant as well. So I'm gonna get off this rant with this audience. I think that generally I'm preaching to the choir on this front. But again, it is your job to drive this cultural thing, hopefully with a CEO that is very much like-minded and is very much about driving this messaging internally. And last is explaining to everybody that they report to the customer, right? Which is sort of a joke. But as you think about key relationships around the business, and I'm gonna spend just a few minutes or a minute on each one of these. These, to me, are the main relationships. As I look around the table in eStaff, or I go to conferences, or as I do quarterly business reviews and check-ins in the customer base, these are the people that I find to give me the most leverage in terms of getting the investment that I need and getting the customer's plight and the customer's needs met by the broader organization. So first, sales. So sales is getting square. We had this discussion at breakfast with a few people on who carry, the good old-fashioned who's setting the right expectations, and are they the right ones or the wrong ones? So there's clearly that's been around since the beginning of time. Who owns renewal? Who owns upsell? Who owns cross-sell? And ensuring that there is good harmony between the customer success organization and the sales organization on how to set the right expectations, how to ensure that you're handing off good information about what the customer needs and how they value the solution, and then ensuring who does what in terms of driving retention, upsell, cross-sell inside of that business. It's really, really hard, especially with this group, because they have really short attention spans. And so I would encourage you to use a ton of patience, but this is one of the biggest ways that you can see pay off on having reduced friction and better, as the customer looks at your company, setting the product aside, who am I dealing with? Who do I talk to when, and all of that? A lot of this tends to live between the sales organization and the customer organizations. I think second is product. So I made the comments about the company that has 70% gross retention and 100% net retention. You are not gonna solve that retention problem through fixing your relationship with sales or having a great support department. There is something fundamentally that's going on with how the solution is marketed, or with how that product is actually showing up in front of the customer. And so to the extent you can quantify issues and bring those issues to the product organization and ensure that they are worried not just about innovation all day long, but they are worried about how do they work to ensure that what shows in front of the customer each and every day is sticky, is interesting, is viral in some ways, is a product management, product engineering, product marketing responsibility. And so ensuring that you've got good personal relationship and you have a good currency of dialogue around, they have a product council, you have a set of the top 3 issues that you're seeing, and making sure that those are being heard and being acted on is essential in your role. Marketing, this is more about positioning. We spend a lot of time at Marketo, just for an example. It's easy. It's not easy. So stop saying it's easy because it just ticks customers off once they actually get through the door that it takes time and effort to implement our solution. So how can you drive the right level of, the most appropriate level of mindset of what to expect and influence ultimately, what that customer perceives to be ready to happen ultimately when they go through the customer experience that you lead them through. The CFO is one in particular, so I would have to say an executive staff, my best sort of relationship friend to this day on our entire executive staff is the CFO of the company. And first, because he's a great guy and he has high integrity and all of that. But second, the reality is the CEO actually doesn't trust any of the stories about who to put money into and how to allocate investments around the business. The CFO, generally, their number one trust point inside the business is the CFO. And so the CFO loves data, loves facts, and so to the extent you can build a relationship with the CFO of your organization about gross retention, net retention, if you put $2 in, you'll get $3 out of the customer success investments, will go way further than you sitting trying to do PowerPoint presentations to the head of sales or the CEO about what you need and why. Because ultimately the CEO will go, this is how much money we have to allocate. Fred, how do you suggest we allocate this? And if you have a CFO as your ally, I think your customers will benefit from it, and I think you as an individual will benefit. And last is just key customers. A, because it keeps it real. You actually know what you're talking about in terms of the challenges directly. And B, I'll tell you, anytime somebody in any of these other organizations comes up with something that I think is just wrong, instead of saying my opinion is, just inserting, well, it's funny, I was at Microsoft last week and they said that was entirely the wrong thing, like start to finish. So we should listen to it is the ultimate sledgehammer inside of how to get leverage done inside the organization, is to represent the views of your customers rather than representing your own views as much as possible. And so I think in order to do that without being, making it up, it's super helpful to have those good relationships inside the customer base. So those are some of my words of wisdom on relationships. I need a battery. Beyond this is I've talked a lot about e-staff, so exec staff, the CEO, how to engage and make sure that the CEO is driving culturally what happens inside the organization. But ultimately, there is this whole thing out there called a board of directors. And I recognize that there are some people here that work in companies so large that you will never even know who the board is, or you'll never interact with them. So, put this in your terms, in terms of who you feel the next level removed is that ultimately influences your destiny. And my take has been some of the best advocates have been the board of directors. The VC, so on a board, in smaller companies, you have the investors and you've got sort of the independents. The independents are just operating executives. They actually are, most of them are used to on-premise world, so they still don't get SaaS largely. In the VC world, they're much more math-oriented and they're much more into and understanding what's going on in the current world and what matters. So to the extent you can affiliate a bit with some of the investors to drive a mindset around the importance of retention, around the customer experience, around how ultimately net retention rates can influence the overall growth of the business, I find to be helpful. And so for me, for example, I actually have more people who are, as I look at, someday I probably won't retire at Marketo and get another job, The reality is I have more people doing references for me or are willingly doing references for me from our board of directors than I do even from the executive staff or other people inside of the organization. So really leaning into that group does great things personally for you in terms of your network. It does great things for your organization and for your customers in terms of investment and influencing from the top down how the CEO thinks about investments as you go through your different cycles. So 3 things, I promise. Takeaway, visibility, culture, and hopefully touched a little bit on relationships. Hopefully this was practical enough and is appropriate for this audience. The expected outcomes, I would expect to see from this, customer data-informed decision-making, like super helpful to have customers influencing where the organization goes, not the product manager who hasn't met a customer, or the marketer who thinks they know what value is and has no clue how customers even consume the product that we offer today. Investment, to me, is a big, big piece of this. And then I do think that there's professional growth opportunities to be able to break out of I'm the CSM person or I'm the PS person or whatever, who seem to have this sort of glass ceiling of sorts above their ability to move upward inside of organizations, because people are in love with the idea of heads of sales and heads of marketing and so forth, getting into COO and CEO roles. But I do think there's an opportunity, if you think about this more strategically, if you create a strategic and an executive voice for you to benefit from this personally in terms of your career. The last thing that I'll finish on is just, so this is my contact information. I would just generally say Dave is a great friend. I believe emphatically about this space. I believe emphatically about this particular technology and this business. I'm going to stick around here the rest. I'm not going to run out of here and bolt. I'm going to stick around. I'll be here the rest of today. I'll be here tomorrow until things wrap up, sort of midday is my understanding. So please, be bold. Let's talk. I'm more than happy to engage with you on these topics. I also certainly have the plethora of talk to me about support and what do you think about how to build comp plans for customer account managers and all of that stuff. I'm certainly very, very well versed in as well. But I wanted to start early on in the session a level up in terms of thinking about how to drive at a macro level the overall initiative that we're trying to push forward, which are great customer experiences inside of high growth businesses as we go through the balance of this year and beyond. So that's all I've got. With that, thank you.